The Thark's dominion had expanded unchallenged for centuries, their fleets dominating star lanes and their colonies sprawling across entire sectors. They believed themselves unshakable, technologically advanced, militarily supreme, culturally arrogant. To them, humanity was nothing more than a footnote in galactic archives, a species still adjusting to interstellar politics. The Tharks did not see a rival, they saw an opportunity. When humans declined their trade demands and refused to yield border systems, the Tharks interpreted it as weakness. Miscalculation began there. A single human research outpost on the edge of neutral space became their first target. It wasn't an act of war, the Tharks claimed, it was enforcement of order. The outpost was vaporized. No warning. No survivors. Footage of the strike was publicly released by the Thark's ambassador, followed by a declaration: any species unwilling to respect the hierarchy of progress would be taught their place. Other civilizations watched in silence, unwilling to interfere. It wasn't uncommon for younger species to be humbled. The Tharks had done it before. No one expected anything more than a formal protest from humanity. But Earth said nothing. Not a single diplomat replied. No press conferences, no retaliation, no mobilization. Just a void of response. For 3 standard days, the Tharks continued broadcasting justifications and warnings, urging humanity to submit before more orderly interventions followed. The silence held. On day 4, a Thark's patrol vanished near a dwarf star adjacent to the Sol system. The ship was heavily armed, accompanied by escorts. No debris, no signal, just disappearance. Internal Thark's analysts dismissed it as spatial anomalies. They pushed forward. 10 days after the initial strike, Thark's forces entered the Gliese Corridor, a contested region monitored jointly by human and neutral parties. The Tharks deployed 36 warships. Within 17 minutes, all were disabled. Not destroyed, disabled. Each one shut down mid-flight, drifting silently. Human code was later found embedded in their core systems, non-lethal, efficient, flawless. Still, no messages came from Earth. No explanation. The galaxy started paying attention. Whispers spread through the diplomatic channels. Rumors of entire Thark scouting parties being erased without alarms. Vessels in warp lanes reporting ghost signals, then vanishing. Other empires noticed strange formations at the edges of their sensor range, silent objects, stationary, blacker than space. The humans weren't reacting with force. They were preparing something else. Something colder. Thark's command convened emergency strategy councils. Intelligence officials urged restraint, suspecting that humanity's lack of response wasn't a sign of fear, but calculation. The High Executor disagreed. He ordered Operation Emberline, the full occupation of all human-controlled outer colonies. Over 4,000 Thark soldiers deployed across 13 planetary installations. They encountered no resistance. The colonies were empty. No bodies. No signs of struggle. Just sterile silence. Logs showed mass evacuations had occurred in minutes, but no vessels were tracked leaving orbit. Thark scientists attempted to access colony databases. They were met with cascading system failures. Then the installations began detonating, one by one, from within. The Thark's fleet tried to retreat. They found their exits sealed. A single message finally arrived. Unencrypted. Unadorned. 6 words. You were given a single chance. The Thark's reaction was immediate. Panic rippled through their hierarchy. Half their border fleets recalled. Emergency conscriptions issued. But it was already too late. Merchant convoys in deep space ceased transmission. Outposts found their energy grids overridden by unknown protocols. Communications blacked out across entire sectors. AI monitors failed. Weapon systems wouldn't respond. And still, Earth remained quiet. Galactic observers, once indifferent, began re-evaluating their diplomatic stance. A few sent envoys to Earth, none returned. Others activated diplomatic AI channels. The response was chilling. We are not seeking allies. We are remembering. The Tharks had made a mistake countless civilizations had made before. They mistook Earth's silence for hesitation. They misunderstood humanity's stillness for fear. What they failed to grasp was that humanity had evolved differently, not around dominance, but around resolve. They were not a species that shouted. They were one that endured, then answered without restraint. By the time the Tharks realized what they provoked, the wheels were already turning. The gears of a machine they couldn't see, couldn't hear, and would never understand. A species that had learned war not for conquest, but survival. A civilization that didn't threaten, but erased. And this time, the galaxy was watching. The first strike was invisible. No beams, no explosions, just silence. An entire Thark's command station in orbit over Grell Prime lost contact with its fleet. When scouts arrived hours later, they found it derelict, engines offline, crew missing. No damage, no distress signal, just absence. Within minutes, 7 more command hubs across Thark's space went dark. Human signatures weren't detected. There was nothing to trace. The Tharks called it sabotage. Their analysts called it impossible. Then came the second wave. It wasn't loud. It wasn't visible. It was absolute. Planetary defense grids began misfiring, targeting their own patrols. Military satellites reoriented themselves and self-destructed. Orbital yards locked up mid-production, internal systems overridden with code marked origin unknown. Everything failed at once. By the time technicians tried manual overrides, kinetic projectiles began dropping from orbit. Not nukes. Not lasers. Pure mass accelerated to relativistic speed. No warning. No defense. Cities ceased to exist in fractions of a second, reduced to craters hundreds of kilometers wide. There was no announcement. Human vessels never appeared. Every strike was executed remotely, through networks the Tharks didn't know existed. By the time they realized their command nodes were compromised, their communication matrix collapsed. Entire chains of command were wiped out in hours. Surveillance feeds showed nothing. Civilians and soldiers alike stood in silence, waiting for something to appear. Nothing came. Attempts to retaliate failed. The Tharks launched counter-strikes against human colonies, only to find coordinates scrambled. Their ships arrived in dead space, fuel exhausted, stranded. Warp gates rerouted them into uncharted sectors, where they were picked apart one by one. No missiles. No boarding parties. Just system shutdowns, one layer at a time. Thark's engineers tried to isolate the attack vectors. Firewalls, air gaps, backups, all failed. Every security measure proved obsolete. Human code wasn't aggressive. It was surgical, unfeeling, perfect. Every Thark's fleet was fighting shadows, losing systems before a single shot was fired. Cyberwarfare was absolute. Entire AI cores were overwritten and looped, endlessly replaying the words. We offered restraint. Panic overtook the Thark's command. They attempted mass relocations of critical personnel. Evacuation ships were rerouted mid-flight. When they reached their destinations, they found scorched landing zones and silent infrastructures. No enemy fire, no troops, just absence, every trace of civilization scrubbed. Every attempt to establish secondary outposts met the same fate. No human message followed. Not a declaration. Not a demand. Just escalation. Thark's border worlds found themselves isolated. Supply routes collapsed. Atmosphere processors failed. Automated repair drones turned hostile, disabling power grids and freezing transport lanes. Satellites once used for agricultural monitoring now hovered silently over cities, tracking movement without interference. No beams fired. No troops deployed. Still, millions vanished. Other species began distancing themselves from the Tharks, severing treaties, rerouting trade. No one wanted to be next. Even those who hated Earth kept silent. The humans hadn't attacked anyone else. They hadn't made threats. Their retaliation was cold, controlled, and focused only on those responsible. Across Thark space, propaganda feeds broke down. In their place came strange transmissions, short clips, timestamped footage of Thark's war crimes, now broadcast to their own citizens. Files from erased archives, war logs, hidden massacres, unredacted reports, all untraceably inserted into Thark's public networks. Soldiers refused orders. Civil uprisings flared. Commanders were lynched by their own. Still, humanity said nothing. The Tharks tried to sue for peace. No reply came. They tried to surrender. No terms were acknowledged. Their diplomatic channels were flooded with static. Their translation AIs crashed. Their embassies on other worlds stood abandoned. No more envoys returned. No more requests were received. It became clear that the humans weren't waging war for territory or conquest. This was not about punishment. It was correction. A species had violated an unspoken line. They didn't understand the cost until it was too late. By the end of the second phase, 73 Tharks-controlled systems were dark. Their core fleets were crippled. Their infrastructure dismantled. Their authority fractured. And still, not one human soldier had been seen. It wasn't war. It was removal. Thark soldiers began to break before the enemy was ever seen. Entire battalions refused to deploy, citing psychological compromise. Medics reported mass hallucinations, but no neural activity confirmed them. Broadcasts flooded their networks, monotone human voices reading casualty lists, not of Thark soldiers, but of every species the Tharks had oppressed. Entire colonies recited back to them, detail by detail, crime by crime, system by system. The voices held no emotion. No accusation. Just facts. Verified. Timestamped. Irrefutable. Civilian networks were next. Every screen, every personal device, every audio feed began transmitting human-compiled records. Nothing doctored. No edits. Surveillance footage, intercepted transmissions, genetic logs. Atrocity after atrocity played without commentary. Families watched their own military leadership commit the acts they had always denied. Denial collapsed under proof. Then came the pattern. Every broadcast ended with one line. "We are returning the truth you tried to bury." Psychological operations escalated without warning. Thark's orbital stations began emitting low-frequency tones audible to those on the surface. No message, no visible change. Within days, sleeplessness spread. Irritability turned to paranoia. Riot control struggled to contain cities. Human satellites drifted overhead, broadcasting synchronized pulses designed not to harm, but to wear down. Technological restraint delivered psychological collapse. Officers committed suicide live on broadcast channels, believing their thoughts were being read. Entire military crews abandoned their ships, convinced they were infected. Morale reports became unusable. Communication centers overloaded with reports of phantom threats. Commanders issued contradictory orders, unaware that their systems were being subtly manipulated to delay, confuse, misinform. Prisons began emptying. Not through jailbreaks, but releases. Human transmission AIs unlocked confidential evidence that proved hundreds of innocent civilians had been falsely detained under Thark's colonial law. Guards turned their weapons on each other. Footage showed prisoners walking out as their captors stood frozen, unable to act, overwhelmed by guilt imprinted through neurological feedback mechanisms embedded in the transmissions. The core empire fractured. Border worlds declared neutrality. Inner colonies began purging Thark's banners from public buildings. Statues fell. Propaganda hubs burned. Governors issued apologies to humanity before vanishing. Cities no longer received supply drops. Convoys refused to leave orbit. AI logistics cores, compromised weeks earlier, redirected shipments into empty sectors or looped supply chains into dead zones. In desperation, Thark's leaders authorized mass propaganda deployments. The messages were intercepted and rewritten mid-broadcast. They now played confessions, genuine, unedited voice logs of Thark's officials discussing their policies of suppression, economic slavery, and biological experimentation. Leaked by human systems without hacking. The data had always existed, humanity simply made it undeniable. Thark's citizens responded with terror. For the first time in their history, they had no enemy to blame. Only mirrors held up by a force that never screamed, never gloated. Human psychological warfare wasn't based on distortion, it was rooted in memory, and the unrelenting presentation of truth. Facts weaponized with surgical accuracy. Rumors spread of whispers and static, of human faces appearing for a single frame in broadcasts, eyes unblinking, never speaking. Ships reported receiving messages seconds before system failure. Always the same words. We remember. No rescue fleets arrived. Allies who had once pledged military aid retracted offers silently. Neutral species imposed diplomatic quarantine around Thark's systems, fearing contagion, not of viruses, but of consequence. The Thark's name triggered silent revocations in trade databases, its history wiped from archives. All because humanity never asked for support. They only showed what was. Entire Thark's academies shut down, as students refused to study under those they now knew were war criminals. Military academies went dark. Graduation ceremonies were cancelled. Recruitment officers vanished. Cultural centers, once proud monuments of Thark's achievement, were turned into centers of grief. Still, humanity never responded to pleas. No terms offered. No dialogue. Just transmission after transmission, each more damning than the last. The Empire was dissolving not from assault, but from inside out, infected by an unrelenting stream of reality. What humanity had unleashed wasn't destruction. It was reckoning. A war fought with silence, data, and the unbearable weight of history. A species dismantled not with fire, but with memory. The final phase began without announcement. Entire Thark's-controlled star systems were flagged non-viable by automated probes that originated from deep space. No known launch, no known builder. Each system's stellar maps were overwritten in galactic networks, redirecting traffic away. Civilian vessels attempting re-entry found their navigational arrays hijacked, warped to distant, uninhabitable voids. Merchant fleets refused passage. Insurance firms marked all Thark space as a death zone. No protests followed. Planetary cleansing began in silence. Advanced orbital machines, black and angular, entered atmosphere undetected. No propulsion signatures. They did not fire. They simply deployed environmental rewriting tools, exotic particles that destabilized key isotopes and planetary crusts, rendering entire biospheres inert. Ecosystems collapsed without heat or flame. Crops withered. Water turned inert. Soil compacted into sterile dust. Cities remained standing, untouched by blast, but lifeless. Terraformers had not come to build. They came to erase. Orbital stations vanished without explosions. Molecular deconstruction swept across surfaces like shadows, erasing architecture mid-structure. Materials disintegrated, absorbed into recycling matrices. No fire, no scream, just silence as the infrastructure of a civilization folded inward. The Tharks watched monuments vanish, not from impact, but from existence. Attempted evacuations were redirected again. Escape vessels reached artificial gates, only to be funneled into artificial pockets of space-time, isolated zones with no exits. These regions contained oxygen, gravity, light, but no star maps, no signals, no timelines. Communication ceased. Location could not be determined. Outside observers labeled these zones memory prisons, places where those who remained would drift, unable to forget, yet unable to warn. Cultural data cores were next. Museums, libraries, song banks, all digitally harvested before deletion. Entire languages folded into human linguistics engines cataloged, then scrubbed from galactic repositories. No copies survived in the Tharks' own networks. Every story, every anthem, every expression became unrecognizable. Statues melted without trace. Flags shredded by drones moving faster than visible motion. Symbols of identity were reduced to abstract static. Heritage unmade. What followed wasn't genocide. The Tharks lived, but their context was removed. No homeworld. No history. No archives. Interstellar records reassigned their designation from empire to former presence. Trade agreements terminated by auto protocols. Alliances rewritten as null. Their names ceased functioning in diplomatic AI filters. It triggered blank returns. Even burial sites were not spared. Human drones arrived silently, scanning remains, archiving DNA sequences, and disassembling markers. Nothing was stolen. Nothing defiled. But nothing remained. It was as if the dead were no longer allowed memory either. Only silence. Artificial moons placed in Thark's orbit emitted a steady pulse, inaudible to the ear, but visible to sensors. It bore one phrase, written in hundreds of alien tongues. "This is the cost of arrogance." Galactic observers, fearing their own erasure, began systematic deletion of Thark's references from public databases. Education boards removed historical records. Journalists purged archives. Planetary councils passed laws forbidding mention of the species without explicit clearance. Children grew up never hearing the name. Adults pretended they never had. Erasure became compliance. A final transmission was intercepted, a low-resolution file sent from an unknown relay node near the galactic rim. It showed Thark's leadership chambers empty. Lights dimmed. Doors ajar. Echoes filled the hall, not from movement, but from distant human radio frequencies looping softly. Not a warning. Not a message. Just presence. Human ships never claimed territory. No planet was occupied. No flag planted. They left nothing behind but absence. The territories remained, but no one entered. Maps labeled them as inaccessible. Not forbidden. Not hostile. Just irrelevant. As if what once lived there never mattered. The campaign ended without declaration. Human networks went dark. Surveillance devices powered down. Probes disengaged. Terraformers retracted. No closing message followed. The silence resumed, but this time, it carried weight. The kind that settles into history as law, not suggestion. The Tharks were not destroyed for conquest or vengeance. They were removed as an example. A demonstration to the galaxy that some provocations do not lead to conflict, they lead to correction. And once it begins, there is no negotiation. Only conclusion. The silence that followed was absolute. Human fleets vanished from sensor range without trails. No lingering probes, no residual signals, no signs of occupation. What remained of Thark's space was untouched physically but hollowed spiritually. The void was more than emptiness, it was deliberate absence. No one spoke of what had occurred. Not in public. Not in records. It became understood without needing to be said. Galactic traffic rerouted permanently. Star maps updated themselves automatically, rerouting vessels thousands of light-years away from former Thark sectors. Navigation systems refused to chart those paths. Any attempt to override met with system denial. Port authorities, trade hubs, even pirate networks began treating the region as cursed. Ships that ignored the new patterns went missing. Their distress beacons echoed back in fragments, always the same phrase. No destination found. Within the Galactic Council, panic turned to compliance. New protocols emerged silently, unofficial, unchallenged. No species was to initiate hostile action toward any human vessel, structure, or colony. It wasn't law. It didn't need to be. No vote passed, no record documented. It became behavioral instinct. Entire civilizations rewrote their military doctrines around non-interference with Earth and its territories. Diplomatic handbooks issued updated conduct guides. No ultimatums, no threats, no provocations. Veterans of Thark's conflicts refused to speak. Those who survived the memory prisons returned changed, mute, withdrawn, unresponsive. Their testimonies remained sealed. When questioned, they said nothing. Some scribbled only one word before silence. Erased. Anthropologists, historians, and analysts debated what to call what happened, but no term stuck. It wasn't war. Not conquest. Not diplomacy. Nothing fit. In time, it became referred to only as The incident. Spoken in hushed tones. Teaching institutions removed Thark's content from curriculum. Galactic data cores purged entries automatically, driven by unknown code no one admitted to writing. Collective forgetting became a reflex. Humanity said nothing. No broadcast, no commemoration, no explanation. They returned to routine as if nothing had transpired. Trade resumed. Science missions continued. Colonies expanded. But their silence became louder than any weapon. Every species understood, the lack of response was the warning. Rumors spread of human machines drifting silently beyond charted regions, mapping stars never seen, scanning planets untouched. Uncrewed, unnamed, unarmed, yet feared. Automated units began appearing in distant systems, not as invaders, but as observers. They never interfered, never engaged, but remained present. The message was clear: provocation would not be repeated. Whispers of ancient human history surfaced, of Earth's wars, of civilizations before spaceflight that faced extinction and rebuilt stronger. Species began studying these records, not for academic interest, but for insight. A pattern emerged: humanity had always been forged through trial, not comfort. Patience, not speed. Memory, not impulse. They were not quick to anger, but once engaged, they never stopped halfway. Diplomatic bodies adjusted entire strategies around human psychology. Not to manipulate, but to avoid awakening it. Treaties were rewritten to accommodate Earth's pace. Proposals came with offers instead of demands. Empires once dominant grew cautious. Expansion slowed. Aggression decreased. Not from morality, but from memory. The name Tharks became unspoken. Not outlawed, but abandoned. Not a warning. A void. Their extinction did not serve as a deterrent, it became a lesson. One that didn't need to be taught twice. No monuments were built. No species claimed responsibility. And none tried to replicate the path that led to it. Over time, explorers noted something peculiar. Stars in former Thark space shone slightly dimmer. Not in brightness, but in presence. As if the region itself had aged differently. The light felt older, colder, stretched. Physics offered no explanation. Observers noted it only as a phenomenon, unmeasurable, but undeniable. And deep within protected data cores, sealed beneath Earth's most secure vaults, sat a file untouched since the final transmission. It bore no title. Just coordinates. A reminder that memory was humanity's sharpest blade. Not rage. Not pride. But memory. The kind that carves in silence and leaves nothing standing. The last species that provoked them no longer exists, not in form, not in record, not in consequence. They weren't destroyed. They were unmade. And the galaxy learned that when humans choose not to respond, they are not ignoring. They are deciding. And once decided, there is no reversal. Only finality.